Thursday. Over now to Laura Kuenssberg for debate, opinions and the latest political stories.
What a week, a never-ending Conservative melodrama. But what's happening to our mortgages could be the bigger real-world nightmare.
Is this the end, Mr Johnson?
He scarpered from Parliament before the verdict.
Will you take responsibility for anything?
But Boris Johnson can't run from Parliament's official judgment. The former Prime Minister lied and lied.
90 days is a very severe sanction.
A stab vest didn't insulate the Prime Minister from questions, even though he plainly didn't want to answer.
You know about a report that I haven't even seen yet, so it's hard for me to comment on it, but we are...
Will you talk to us once you've had a chance to read?
Well, what we are doing is having an interview now talking about tackling illegal migration.
Boris Johnson is not only a lawbreaker but a liar. He's not fit for public office and he's disgraced himself.
It's been another week of self-inflicted political pain for the Conservatives. But the real-world pain is what really matters. Rising costs for millions of homeowners who might find it hard to make ends meet. So our main question this morning we'll put to Michael Gove. Will the Conservatives stop arguing for long enough to work out what to do about our mortgages? Ahead of the SNP in the polls for the first time in years. Labour in Scotland, its leader Anna Sarwar joins us for the first time. Vladimir Putin has put her husband behind bars for opposing him. But Evgenia Karamirza tells us this morning she will never stop fighting for her husband's freedom. And his shelf is groaning with awards. Actor Sir Mark Rylance tells us about his new show and the shifts on stage and screen. Morning. And with me at the desk, the historian Samuel Kasumu, who worked in Number 10 and hoped to be the next Conservative Mayor of London, and the former Cabinet Minister Justine Greening. A warm welcome to you all, and welcome to you this morning as well, of course. First, let's take a look at what is making the news. A lot of the papers still going with the aftermath of the report into Boris Johnson that gave its official verdict that he lied. The Observer claims Rishi Sunak's allies are dismissing him as just an ex-MP. But the Telegraph has a different Partygate story, saying that Sue Gray, the senior civil servant who wants to be Keir Starmer's chief of staff, broke the civil service job rules by taking that on. But the Express says, get a grip, stop worrying about Partygate and save the economy. But making most headlines this morning, the Sunday Mirror has unearthed a video taken at a party held during lockdown at Conservative headquarters. Two of the partygoers are on Boris Johnson's controversial honours list. Well, a whole range of takes there, but so much discussion and coverage still of the same story, Partygate, which goes on and on, so hard for the Conservatives to shake that off. Justine, when you saw that video, what went through your mind?
Well, what went through my mind is it was a Christmas that I didn't get to spend with the rest of my family, and it was the last Christmas my grandma was alive. I'd love to have spent time close to her, like they did, partying. So I thought it was disgraceful, and I think it just reminds people that there were rules set in Number 10, and so many people at the top of that party weren't following them themselves.
And Samuel, you were working inside Downing Street during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I mean, what was going on? Did you know that there were social gatherings taking place?
Yes, I was just saying to Simon earlier, I have a sister who came from New York to visit around that period. And of course, I couldn't see her because the rules were you were not allowed to mix in different groups. And so, yes, I was aware. I didn't attend any of the parties, and as you know, some of the reasons why I chose to leave was because, I didn't want to be a part of some of the things I was seeing.
So you were seeing parties happening during lockdown, and that's one of the reasons that you quit?
One of, but, many others as well.
Simon, what do you make of this still going on? I mean, when you were here last, we were discussing about some of the Conservatives' sort of woes and never-ending arguments with each other, partly as a result of the pandemic. But what did you think when you saw these images?
Well, on the one hand, it seems... It could seem to be ridiculously trivial, really, but it is profoundly not trivial. It's profoundly serious. During terrible emergencies like a pandemic, we agree to give up some of our normal life because we share our sense of having something in common with each other. You do not meet because you're in danger of infecting other people. So everybody, agreed to give up some of one's normal practice, often in extremely difficult circumstances. So while in the summertime, where we are now, we all don't really want to hear, part of us doesn't want to remember how tough life was, this is a source of genuinely righteous anger. Because it seemed to be so feckless, so irresponsible, the sort of thoughtlessness and stupidity. Stupidity can also be immoral sometimes, Laura, and the jiving jumper and the Christmas outfits and the completely idiotically amoral delivery of life is normal, let the little people suffer, let the other people give up what they would normally do, just pour another glass of Bulgarian Burgundy and have done with it.
Samuel, just quickly on the specific question that has exercised Westminster this week, do you think that Boris Johnson knew what was going on?
That is a very difficult question. I think the Privileges Committee's report was obviously very damning. I'm never going to give an opinion on whether or not Boris knew what was going on, but what I can say is he was captain of the ship, so he was and is ultimately responsible for the things that happened. And I think it's also important to say that I wasn't the only colleague that wasn't participating in these activities. There were a lot of people working hard at trying to save lives during that period. And so I think it would be unfair to paint everybody with the same brush. And
you were part of the team that created the vaccine, so we'll talk to you a bit about that a bit later in the programme. All three of you, thank you very much for now. Now, being able to buy your own home is not an unreasonable ambition. It's meant to be what Tory dreams are made of. Being able to afford your rent is probably not too much to ask either. But rising mortgage rates, disappearing mortgage deals and spiralling rents make keeping a roof over your head a tougher and tougher proposition for many people. And lots of you have been telling us in the last couple of days that you are frightened about what might be coming round the corner. Keep your questions and comments coming. You can do that, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or use the hashtag #BBCLauraK. And there'll be lots of chat about the conversation we're about to have on the BBC Live page. The address is there for you now. That conversation is with Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, and we'll talk about mortgages and housing in a second because that is so important to everybody watching this morning. But we have to start by talking about this video that, as we've just heard, Simon has said, has caused, again, righteous anger. Now, as Justine said, she wasn't able to see members of her family. If you were one of those people who'd lost a relative during the pandemic, or wasn't able to see a grandparent in a care home, what would you think when you saw that video?
Well, it's terrible. And I think that what Samuel, Justine and Simon said, they're all right. They are all absolutely correct in their reaction to this. As Simon pointed out, the restrictions were put in place. The curtailment of liberty happened because we needed to make sure that the virus did not spread and placed an intolerable strain on the NHS, and then, as a result, provide people with a situation where healthcare was not there for them. So we all accepted a curtailment of liberty.
Well, you didn't.
And then,
these people didn't accept
and then
a
we
curtailment
see
of liberty.
this, and naturally, anyone looking at this video is going to be extremely angry.
Should you say sorry to people this morning for this? This was happening in your party headquarters. We know it happened in Downing Street on your party's watch. Should you apologise?
Yes, I am sorry, and I do apologise, unreservedly. This particular event, I think, led to an investigation that's already happened, because the video is new, but it was known that there was an event. There was a photograph, I think, that was made public, and as a result, there was an investigation. Disciplinary action was taken, and as we all know, there have been police investigations into what happened in Downing Street. But putting that to one side, on a personal level, I would like to apologise to people for this behaviour. It's unacceptable and indefensible.
And nevertheless, you say it is indefensible. Nevertheless, two people who are in this video were given honours by Boris Johnson? Should they be stripped of them?
No, I don't think that. And I have to explain the context for that, so I hope that you and viewers will allow me to do so. The decision to confer honours on people was one that was made by Boris Johnson as an outgoing Prime Minister. Outgoing Prime Ministers have that right. Whether or not they should is a legitimate matter of public debate, but they do at the moment. An outgoing Prime Minister hands the list to the existing Prime Minister, to Rishi Sunak. The Prime Minister, Rishi, hands it to the House of Lords Appointments Committee, an independent body. They scrutinise it. There were some names that were on that list that the committee vetoed. It then goes back to the PM, back to the palace.
That's the process, but you don't think the people who were caught out in this video should lose those honours?
Again, I have to, and I do respect due process. So we'll all have our personal feelings about who was on that list. The decision about who was on that list was Boris Johnson's.
So, but that's made and that's a done deal.
That
okay.
is.
All right.
That's the nature of the process.
Okay. Let's talk about something else then. I want to show you and our viewers something that is happening right now. This time last year, a 2-year fixed rate mortgage, you could get a deal for just over 3%, costing you £963 a month. The kind of deal this time, 12 months later, nearly double.
Yes.
£1,200 a month. How on earth are people going to afford that kind of thing?
Well, it's uniquely challenging, and there are lots of people who, as you quite rightly point out, are on fixed-rate mortgages, who are moving off them, who are facing significant increases, and it's part of a broader cost of living challenge that so many people are facing. That's why the government is concentrating on making sure that we can deal with that cost of living crisis by halving inflation. That is our clear commitment. It is our #1 policy commitment.
But this is talking about what's happening to people in the real world, not your ambition by the end of the year.
Yes, but that ambition will have a direct impact on people's lives in a beneficial way.
You hope. One of our viewers, Alice Plant, has told us that her mortgage is going to go up. I think we can show her comment. Her mortgage is going to go up by more than £400 a month.
Yes.
£400 on top of everything else going up and up and up. So I'll ask you again, how on earth are people going to afford this?
Well, the government's already taken steps to support people through the cost of living crisis, including particularly support to help people with energy bills.
So how are you going to help them with their mortgage bills?
Well, again, what we need to do is to make sure that we are in a position where inflation overall is defeated. Now, in order to do that, interest rates have risen. Interest rates are rising in other countries as well. And again, it's no comfort to any individual when we talk about the global economic picture, but for the people who are making decisions in this country and elsewhere, it's that global economic backdrop that determines what happens to mortgage rates. There's a direct connection between war in Ukraine, the horrors that Putin's unleashing, and the price that we are all paying.
And there's also a connection between what the Conservatives did in the autumn, as many of our viewers have pointed out to us, the decisions that were taken then that I know you objected to have made the situation worse by many people's calculations. And you're explaining some of the causes of the problem there. What our viewers want to know is, what are your solutions? Dean Patterson has told us, my mortgage is due for renewal. I'm due to pay double. Mike in Essex has said he can't sleep at the moment with the stress his mortgage is going to go up by £500 a month. So what are you going to do about it?
Well, the first thing is to make sure that we command the confidence of international markets, that we prevent interest rates rising further than they need to, and that's exactly why the 3 economic principles that guide us are so important.
Michael Gove, I'm asking you what you're going to do for people who are terrified about not being able to keep a roof over their heads. Let's not talk about, the causation, the global economic situation, which is important, but what I'm asking you is, what practical help will you as a government offer people who are genuinely in distress?
Well, the most important thing to do is to try to make sure that interest rates don't go up further and further. That is the factor that is driving the increase in mortgage rates. Now,
but that's down to the Bank of England. We think they're going to go up again this week. So what practically, are you going to offer any financial support to people in distress?
Well, several things. We've already offered financial support. We always remain vigilant about what more can be done in order to help people through difficult circumstances. And we're also taking steps to reform the housing market overall to improve the position of people in the private rented sector. As you quite rightly pointed out earlier, increases in interest rates overall bear on them. But the fundamental big issue is making sure that we reduce debt, that as a government we are not borrowing in a way that is unaffordable, because if we are running a deficit which is unsustainable as a country, that drives up interest rates overall.
And I haven't heard there, with respect, any single solution directly for people who are struggling with their bills. And there's an interesting thing here, because this time last year, when energy bills were projected to go up so much, the government for ages said, oh, no, we won't help, and then did.
No, and I argued that we should.
And when it came to the pandemic, when people weren't able to go to work, the government stepped in with furlough.
Yes.
Is it the case that you are ruling out stepping in any way to the mortgage market to help people who are terrified about what might happen?
Well, I think precisely in your question lies the answer. So in the past, when there have been specific challenges that people have faced, then the government has stepped in and has put its hands around people.
And will you this time?
But there's a difference in analysis between us in that, on this question, and it goes specifically to what is the best way of tackling the mortgage problem that people face. And the government's belief, and I think this is reflected by what other governments are doing as well, is you need to go to the root cause of this. So you can provide temporary amelioration.
No,
you can provide a salve, a balm and intervention. And as I said earlier, we keep that under review. But there are two critical things. If we're thinking about any sort of support for anyone who's going through difficult times, then it will be the Chancellor of the Exchequer who would make any announcement at the appropriate moment, taking into account everything that we face here. And there's another very important point here as well. Both the intervention in COVID and the intervention on energy require government to spend money. If government is spending money, then it can't be magicked out of thin air. It will either come from people's income through taxation, and we've got to keep taxation low in order to stimulate growth, or borrowing.
But what are you saying to people this morning?
Well,
and it may be that, I'm not for one second suggesting there is a right or a wrong answer to this. But what I'm hearing from you this morning is that as things stand, the government does not plan to provide any support to people who are struggling to pay the mortgage.
No, I think, again, if that's what you take from what I've said, then I haven't communicated specifically clearly enough. When we're talking about the economy, we have to be careful. And anything that I or any government minister says about future spending will have an impact on an assessment that the markets will make about the durability and the safety of the stewardship of our economy overall.
So there may be a possibility further on, but now you're not willing to commit. That's what I'm hearing. And we must move on.
What I'm saying, I think there's a difference between keeping under review and ruling out, and that's the distinction that I'd like to draw. Absolutely. But also, and I think everyone will understand this, if you spend public money in order to deal with particular crises, you are inevitably adding to the stock of debt. And if you add to the stock of debt, that puts pressure on interest rates. The worst thing to do would be to spend money in order to provide a short-term relief, which would then mean that our overall finances were in a weaker position and interest rates were higher for longer and inflation was higher for longer, which is why...
to do that right
which
now.
is why, at a critical moment, I think there's one other thing that does need to be said about borrowing.
Let's move on. You've made that case very clearly. You said we're not ready to do it for now, and it might come with an unacceptable price tag. Now, you have a complicated history with Boris Johnson. And the last time you were here, you told us you believed his claim that he didn't know what was going on during Partygate. There you are with him the morning after the referendum, all those years ago. Do you now agree with the Privileges Committee that he lied?
The Privileges Committee report is pretty clear, but I think there are several things to say here. The first is that it is Boris's sincere belief that he was assured that the rules were followed. I would invite everyone to read the Privileges Committee report. It draws some important distinctions between Boris's belief, the way in which he sought to assure himself on the facts, and then the views and indeed the testimony of others. But I entirely understand that there is a desire for what was a complex, fraught and flawed execution of policy within Number 10 to be summed up in one word. But the reason the Privileges Committee both took their time and issued a report at such length is that there are complexities there. So reducing it to a single badge to pin on Boris Johnson, I think isn't right. But you're going to ask me how I'm going to vote tomorrow?
Well, I'm going to ask you if you endorse that important report. Will you vote for it tomorrow?
I've read the whole report. There are parts of it that I think are excellent work. I don't agree with the conclusion, however, personally. I think that the final conclusion, the decision to impose a 90-day penalty is not merited by the evidence that the committee have put forward.
So will you vote for the report or not?
I will not vote. I will abstain.
What will the Prime Minister do?
I do not know, but I think it's critically important that each individual member of the House of Commons forms their own judgment. So I would not wish to influence anyone else. My own judgment is the committee have done good work. It is a good report. There are clear areas where the actions of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister fall short of what should have been expected. No doubt about that. And it is appropriate that he faces criticism. He has already forfeited his job as Prime Minister and left the House of Commons.
By his own volition.
His own decision. So we now have a decision to make as members of the House of Commons. My own view is I'm grateful to the committee. I think their work is good, but I don't agree with the conclusion.
But what people will want to know is, do you think the Prime Minister should turn up in order to back the institutions of Parliament? Should the Prime Minister be there tomorrow?
I should not give advice to any other individual member of Parliament.
I'm asking what you think.
My own view is that each individual should make up their mind. It is a matter for each individual reading that report and weighing it. And I will not criticise any member of Parliament for any decision they take on the basis of that report.
What would you say to colleagues who are still supporting Boris Johnson very noisily and criticising others who do not?
Well, I'm a free speech fundamentalist. So my view is that the whole point about having a democratic system, a parliamentary system, is that people should feel entirely free to share their views, however pungently, however much I might disagree with them on this. That is the sign of a healthy system.
But is it helpful to the Conservatives for people to keep waging this war, to keep going in for another bout?
Well, what is really important, I think, is that, of course, you're going to ask questions because the vote's tomorrow and your viewers, many people are interested in it. But for me, going back to the point that we were discussing earlier on mortgages, I spend most of my time thinking about how we can get a better deal for people in the private rented sector, how we can make sure that people in socially rented homes and council housing are in decent homes, how we can shift the economic picture so that we can get a more equal society, and critically, how we deliver on halving inflation, reducing debt, growing the economy, and making sure that we also cut waiting lists and stop the boats.
I was wondering if you were going to get through all of the 5 pledges, but I just, precisely for the reason you said there, you spend most of your time trying to think about other things. Do you ever, Michael Gove, you've been a central character in all the traumas and tribulations for the Conservative Party in the last years, do you ever just sit back and think, you know what, we've made a horlicks of so much of this. The country gave you a huge opportunity in 2019 with a massive majority. You had the referendum vote, which of course was what you wanted, that result. Do you ever just wonder, why did we end up making such a mess of all of this?
No, I don't. I look back.
Never? Never crosses your mind?
No, every day, I think everyone in public life will reflect on the challenges, reflect on mistakes and lessons to be learned. I have made mistakes. I've learned some lessons. Other people will make a judgment of whether or not I've learnt the right lessons. But talking of learning lessons, no pun intended, I look back at what we've achieved in education. Justine, your guest, was an education secretary who was at the forefront of driving change to advance social mobility. We now have the children in this country who are the best readers in the Western world. We have moved up the international league tables for literacy, for numeracy and for science. That is a real beneficial difference that millions of people have benefited from. And when Justine was Education Secretary, as a Conservative Education Secretary, we had succeeded in narrowing the gap between the performance of children from poorer and wealthier backgrounds, even as that gap was growing in our native Scotland. I'm proud of that. I'm proud that as Environment Secretary, We got rid of a system which meant that money went to the wealthy simply on the size of their landholding, and instead we used that money to improve our environment, to invest in nature, and to bring back many of the parts of our country that had been nature depleted to a state of a greater degree of natural environmental health.
Well, Michael Gove, thank you. It's always great to have you in the studio, and thank you for taking questions on a range of subjects after a very dramatic week. Well, let's see there what Justine Greening, who Michael Gove was flattering during his last few comments there, made of that. I mean, Justine, do you think that the Conservatives are going to be able to move on from all of this?
I hope so, but I think it would be easier to persuade the public that we've moved on from it if MPs simply went into the House of Commons on Monday and supported the Privilege Committee report. I think it's actually quite important for people to see that there was due process, it's come out with an outcome, and get behind that. And so that's I think, actually quite an important moment for the Conservatives.
So is it disappointing to you to hear that Michael Gove's going to go, but he's going to abstain and then won't tell us what the PM's going to do?
Well, as he says, everyone will make their minds up, but I think people are in Parliament to take votes, and I think they should be decisive about supporting the Privilege Committee work. Essentially, it's important to recognise that MPs, and especially Prime Ministers, cannot mislead Parliament and be allowed to get away with that.
Samuel, we talked there with Michael Gove a lot about housing. Now, I know it's something you're very interested about, and you've written about in your book, Outsiders, about your own history. How much of a problem do you think it really is, particularly from a sort of generational point of view? Do you think the Conservatives really get it?
I think some get it. I think one of the reasons why I'm not the candidate that is going to be contesting against Sadiq Khan next year is because some don't. I think Michael Gove is a fine politician, but bluntly, the scrapping of mandatory targets for house building is borderline unforgivable.
Unforgivable.
And I think we're going to probably pay for that in the polls next year.
Why do you think then that choice has been taken?
Well, you look at places like home counties where maybe people are less keen on house building, and it was, you know, in my opinion, a political decision, but a very short-term decision, because I think there were a lot of young people around my age who are struggling not just to buy a home, but to pay rents, and as a result, they're going to be looking for politicians that can empathise with the experiences that they currently have.
Simon, what do you make of that? I mean, you're at the other end of the generational scale, if I may say.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Michael Gove is so charming, and the message was suck it up, everybody, and the best of British luck as far as mortgage raises go. And there were two kind of very crucial footnotes to what he was saying, I think. I mean, both of which really aren't, I mean, some alluded to this. One is the sort of general sense in the country of profound inequity of opportunity, really. And it's wonderful that, you know, all sorts of educational opportunities have been opened up. That's indisputable. It's equally very unwonderful and upsetting that in so many other respects, the way inflation has hit people's fortunes very unequally in the country, while they, you know, see the well-off doing better off. And secondly, the dreaded B word, which every time you have me on, Laura, it's wonderful. I'm the only person who actually dares to utter the dreaded word Brexit again. You know, our inflation rate is worse right now, I'm not saying it'll stay that way, than any other developed country in the EU. Mortgage rates also very bad compared to competitors. So this is not totally incidental, because Brexit has driven labour costs up. We all know that, and that's contributed to inflation.
The Governor of the Bank of England was saying that this week.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the immense, hairy, mighty tusk, not even elephant, mastodon in the room.
But we've left, so we have to move on and focus on the future. And I think that's the most important thing.
Moving on requires actually saying we've made the most colossal mistake.
But what does how does that add any value to what we do next?
Well, because you actually tell yourself the truth in politics. Okay. And in another respect, we've been talking about the way democracy depends on the acceptance of truth.
Justine, when you hear Samuel talking about the Conservatives sort of missing the generational boat, is that something that concerns you? I know you do a huge amount of now on social mobility and, you know, trying to recreate a sense of that. But when you hear Samuel talking like that as a young Conservative, what do you think?
I thoroughly agree with him. I think actually this issue of Brexit and take back control, the reason that phrase resonated so much with people, it was much more of an individual sense of people not feeling like effort led to reward. And that's why the other half of what Boris won a landslide on, levelling up and social mobility, equality of opportunity, was so important because it was about fixing that much more homegrown structural inequality of opportunity problem that Britain's got. And of course, it is a challenge with mortgage rates going up, and we know the people who are going to be on the sharp end of those challenges. It's not going to be people who are wealthier, it's going to be people who are already further behind.
And talking about opportunity, Samuel, people might be aware that you were hoping to become the Conservative London mayoral candidate, but you didn't make it to the shortlist. Why do you think that is? You know, you'd worked in Downing Street, you've been quite a prominent person in the party.
Yeah, and I had the most backers, etc., etc. To be honest, it's because I'm an outsider. People said to me, Samuel, you don't sound like a politician. People that were in the room deciding the long list, and others said, Samuel, you haven't attended enough dinners. And so, you know, all of the indication was that the reason why they didn't want me in the room was because I represented something that perhaps they were slightly uncomfortable with.
So you were told that you don't sound the right way, you don't know the right people?
But yes. I mean, if you look at the logic, I know not all of your viewers will know who I am, but certainly in the Westminster bubble and in Conservative circles, there was no logical reason why I wouldn't have made a long list. I'm not upset about it, this is politics, but we have to ask ourselves, is this the way we want our political structures to function?
Well, you've written more about those structures and your hope of getting into those structures to make a difference in your book, The Power of the Outsider.
Power of the Outsiders out.
Oh, well, there you are. Take in your own plug. Well, there we go. If you don't ask, you don't get. Thank you, all three of you, for now, because you might remember a few weeks ago we went to interview the Russian ambassador to the UK, and in part of what was a surreal conversation, we showed him a question from a woman called Evgenia Karamirza. She wanted to know why Vladimir Putin throws his critics in jail.
It is not my judgment, it is judgment by the court.
Her husband, Vladimir, a journalist and activist who has British as well as Russian citizenship, was sentenced to 25 years in prison after he had criticised the Putin regime. His sentence followed 2 poisonings, assassination attempts that she says were carried out by the people who are now his captors. So I've been asking her what she made of the ambassador's answer.
When he answered that question, because that says a lot. You know, just anthropologically, it's interesting to see these people telling lies and lies and lies and trying to convince themselves of their own lies. Because obviously they have to understand that they're lying, right? I mean...
What would you like the government to do?
Well, I would definitely like him to be more forceful and outspoken in Vladimir's case. And I would like these governments to use any means available to save my husband from what's happening to him, because he was targeted twice for assassination in the past. And I realized that the Russian regime considers him a personal enemy. And I have every reason to believe that Vladimir's life is in danger now that he's held by literally the same people who tried to kill him twice in the past.
How is he?
His spirit is still strong. You know, he's amazingly strong and inspirational to so many people. And he continues giving people hope and encouragement, even from behind bars. So spiritually, he's very strong. Morally, he's very strong. His health, of course, is not as strong as I would like it to be. After 2 poisonings, he lost over 20 kilograms. So, you know, I understand that for someone in his condition, someone who survived 2 assassination attempts in the past, Vladimir does not have 5 years, let alone 25. So I believe that it is also my duty as a Russian citizen, as a mother of 3, and as Vladimir's wife, to continue fighting by his side. And I will do that for as long as it takes me.
I know he just spoke to your children for the first time in a long time. Can you tell us anything about that conversation? What did he say to them and what did they say to him?
Well, you know, as it is heartbreaking because I was not even home when that conversation happened. I was doing my advocacy. I was away. I was on yet another trip. But the kids were able to hear their father's voice, and I'm so happy for them. And I'm happy about them having these 15 minutes with their father, 5 minutes each for our 3 kids. So, you know, it's the fact that I'm happy after all this torture of having the father torn away from them. It's how is it okay. So yes, they talked to the father and they told him that they loved him. They told him what they were doing in their lives, because Vladimir, of course, is missing a lot. He's always been there for the kids, you know.
And just finally, this is a hard question to answer. You've said you don't think he has 5 years left, but do you think you'll see your husband again?
I do. I am an optimist, and I also know that I believe in my strength, and I believe in Vladimir's strength, and I will continue fighting, because what is happening today, this regime of Vladimir Putin, it's absolutely inhuman. And I believe that I will see Vladimir, because the idea was to raise these kids together, and I need him back in the picture. He's not going to get out of this one. I do believe that I will see him, and I also believe that because I have so many friends and allies in my fight all over the world. So I know that I'm not alone in this fight, and I will continue.
The incredible Evgenia Kara-Murza. Simon, as a historian, how do you look at where Russia is at this stage?
Well, I first want to say how moving and that was, and how much respect one must pay from generation to generation. In some senses, Laura, you know, this terrible, tragic epic of the price of telling the truth against hideous autocracy is paid so often, you know, the case in the 1930s, the case in the 1950s. We can sort of come to accept it as part of the way. It's just shrug our shoulders and say, it's very nice to live in democracy. There are always evil people in evil regimes. But it's very important, really, with everything else we have, inflation, cost of living, not to discount the kind of epic struggle between freedom and tyranny. And we're in exactly such situation now. Russia, of course, actually is in a situation, Putin is in a situation where he has to somehow prevail in this war, else he's going to be displaced by even more brutal people like Prigozhin on his right. How the war resolves itself, even with the most expansive historical wisdom possible, it's very, very difficult and dark to see right now.
Thank you, Simon. One of the things we will be doing is keeping an eye on Evgenia's story, and hopefully we'll speak to her again sometime. Thank you all very much for now. Now on to something different. There is good news for Labour in Scotland. No one said that sentence very much in the last few years. But a Sunday Times poll suggests for the very first time in a very long time, the party's actually ahead of the SNP after all its trauma and embarrassment. And tomorrow, Keir Starmer will be in Scotland to announce more detail on the party's UK-wide plan for green jobs. But remember, Labour has just slowed down some of its spending plans for that green transition. So does it really stack up? Anas Sarwar is Labour's leader in Scotland, and he joins us for the first time this morning. He's in Glasgow. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Laura.
The party's announcing plans tomorrow to give members of the public discounts if they sign up to having clean energy projects like wind turbines or solar panels in their community. How would that work?
Well, we want to use the strength of the UK Treasury to legitimately deliver a green revolution in our country. And our plans are rooted in 4 key principles. The first is more jobs, not less jobs. Second, lower bills, not higher bills. Third, greater energy security and less reliance on imports from despotic regimes like Russia. And fourth is climate leadership. I want Scotland to lead the world and the UK to lead the world in the green revolution. And that's why through GBE, the Great British Energy Company, we will make those strategic investments to make sure that we realise that ambition. And that's partly partnering with local authorities, devolved administrations, parliaments, our regional mayors, for example, as well as those larger scale strategic investments so we can leverage in the industry so we can genuinely deliver that transformation that's good for the North East, good for Scotland and good for every part of the UK.
Now that all sounds great, like you're promising milk and honey coming out of all of the taps, but you know, this week the Labour Party actually slowed down its promise to invest £28 billion a year in the green transition. So why should anybody believe that you'll stick to any of that when you're not sticking to your first spending commitment on it?
I actually think that what Rachel Reeves said in the last week demonstrates that we're serious about it, because
you're going to spend less money.
No, because we are being realistic about the economic circumstances we're currently living in, and the economic circumstances that we may inherit from this disastrous, economically illiterate Tory government. When we first announced this policy 2 years ago, the interest rate on foreign borrowing was much, much lower from what it is today. So we have a deliverable, well thought through plan that is actually going to transform the country. We're talking about almost £100 billion of investment. But I think it's really important to stress that this green transformation is not going to happen just with government money alone or government action alone. It's only going to happen if we partner with the industry. That's partly the oil and gas industry in the northeast, but also partner with local communities across the country to deliver local benefits around the green transformation. We've had over a decade now of big promises from both a UK Tory government and a Scottish SNP government that somehow we were going to deliver the Saudi Arabia of renewables in Scotland. It's not happened, it's not been delivered. Labour's not going to miss that chance. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance.
But the government's already got proposals to advance a scheme where if people want a wind turbine in their area, in order to get discounts or to get money back for their community. So why is this any different?
Well, look, it's a completely different scale. What you're talking about right now is little small pots of money and little strategic announcements to get the headlines and to get the press release, rather than actually doing the hard work to deliver for people across the country. We were promised that in Scotland, for example, and we've seen the government patently fail to deliver that transformation. So this is a complete rethink, because we're running out of time. We have a climate emergency. And we have got to deliver it really quickly and really significantly if we are going to confront both the cost of living crisis, but also the climate emergency, the global climate emergency we see right around the world. And I honestly believe this is a big, bold, transformative package that we'll be announcing tomorrow that's going to be great news for Scotland, but also great news for the UK and great news for the planet.
But part of this, though, people look at and think maybe there's some quite nasty news in it too, and there could be a risk to jobs as well as very big costs. Part of Labour's plan is not to grant any new licences for oil and gas. Now that affects particularly the huge North Sea industry in the north of Scotland, and we've spoken to one of the union bosses, Gary Smith of the GMB. Now he's got a lot of concern. Do you accept that stopping granting new licences for oil and gas will inevitably mean closures of platforms and job losses?
No, I don't. But I'm really glad you asked the question, Laura, because it's really, really important that we stress this point, particularly for those people that work in the oil and gas industry in the northeast. There is not a suggestion of any cliff edge. There will be no cliff edge. There will be no turning off of the tap. We are clear that oil and gas will play a significant role in our energy industry for decades to come. What we're talking about is building the strategic partnerships in order to actually deliver the green revolution. And I want to be really upfront about this. We need the oil and gas industry, all those businesses, the scale of the investment that they're able to make, to partner with government to actually deliver on this objective. And that's what you'll have, a genuine partnership.
But can you guarantee that there won't be job losses? Because it's a simple logic, isn't it? And you know, and investors hear that there won't be new licences, they will look elsewhere. That is likely to accelerate closures. That is likely, ultimately, to cost jobs. You can't guarantee there won't be job losses.
So look, I've met with leaders of the industry this week, and I was really, really clear that we will honour all existing licences. Any new licences that are issued between now and the next Labour government, we will of course honour them as well, because that's partly important for the industry to make those investment decisions. But also, we do not want to open up a UK government to perhaps big compensation claims. So what we're talking about is building that genuine partnership for the transformation. And I genuinely believe that this is deliverable. I know it's good for the North East. I know it's good for Aberdeen. I know it's good for the UK. It's a positive plan, a transformational plan, and one we're going to sell with confidence.
And Asarwa, it's the first time we've had you on the show, and happily for you, it's on the day that the Sunday Times puts Labour ahead of the SNP for the first time in a very long time in Scotland. It suggests you're going to win 26 seats at the general election in Scotland. Is that realistic?
Look, first of all, I'll say it's feet firmly on the ground. Of course, it's good news, it's positive news, but we're not complacent. We've still got a hell of a lot of work to do to persuade people across Scotland and across the country that the Labour Party is ready to serve and ready to deliver a transformative Labour government.
But is that realistic, that number of 26? I mean, is that anywhere on in your wild, is that a wild imagination, or is that something you might hope for?
Well, look, 2 years ago when I became the leader, we were 32 points behind the SNP, and if you had told me then that 2 years on we'd be neck and neck with the SNP in the opinion polls, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have believed that we're close to them. I wouldn't have believed that we were neck and neck. But I think something different is happening in Scotland. I think there is momentum with the Scottish Labour Party. I think there is a mood for change. But as I say, I'm not complacent. I think people have understood that they want to get rid of this economically illiterate, morally bankrupt Tory government. But I think they're also growing more and more out of touch with this incompetent, dysfunctional SNP government. But as I keep stressing to people, the easy part is saying why your opponents deserve to lose. The harder part is setting out why you deserve to win.
But
and I'm not complacent about that for a second. I'm going to work day and night to persuade people to positively vote Labour, not just vote against the Tories or the SNP.
But it's interesting. Last week, Alan Cumming, the actor and a very prominent Scot, said in this studio that actually Labour looked like Tory light. And there are a lot of people on the left of your party around the UK, not just in Scotland, who look at, Keir Starmer's promise to ditch tuition fees. That's gone. I know you've got a different position in Scotland, but whether you look at what some people see as watering down some of your climate investment, and there is a kind of, it's not really the Labour Party. What do you say to them?
Well, look, first of all, in terms of those people that are ardent SNP supporters, of course they're going to want to attack the Labour Party. Of course they're going to tarnish the Labour Party because they know that the Tories winning again is perhaps the only way they can resuscitate their own party here in Scotland. Hamza Yousaf's already said it doesn't matter if the Tories win again across the UK. Actually, it really matters if the Tories win again, and that's why Labour is determined to get rid of this rotten Tory government. But I also say to people, look, I didn't join the Labour Party for us to be a protest movement, for us to keep losing elections but still to wake up in the morning happy that we are ideologically pure. I am in the Labour Party. People support the Labour Party because they want the Labour Party to be a party of government so we can actually do things for the country positively in line with our values. That's a positive, that's a good thing. And Keir Starmer has transformed the Labour Party in the last 3 years. I hope people can see we've made significant change in Scotland, but we've still got work to do. We're not complacent about it, and we're determined to do that work.
OK, Anna Sauer, great to have you with us from Scotland. It'll be interesting to see what Keir Starmer has to say when he is there alongside you tomorrow. Now, whether you are a sofa TV binger or a movie buff or you love the live crackle of the theatre, you will know Sir Mark Rylance, one of the greats of his generation. His Shakespeare performances are legend. He's won an Oscar and just about every other award going. But you might have watched him with the kids or on your own as the BFG, or you might know him as the brooding outsider, whether Cromwell in Wolf Hall or the Russian sleeper in Bridge of Spies. He told me he'd been an outsider and an oddball as a young man. And his return to the London stage in Dr. Semmelweis, he plays another maverick, a real-life hero who challenged the medical world with his theories and saved countless lives.
Well, it's a story about a person who makes a remarkable discovery that saves hundreds of thousands of lives. So that's interesting to me whenever. We're always needing new discoveries in all fields of human activity. And then the other aspect of this particular story is that he can't convince anyone. And the disease that he's stopped was killing tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And so the second half of the story is why is he unable to convince people of something that he clearly proves very simply as washing his hands. Stops this scourge across Europe, across America, and everywhere. So there are two things in it that are interesting for, I think, whether you're into medicine or not.
And the parallels, perhaps, with the pandemic. We all remember those messages of being told to wash your hands. But we also see now the sort of proliferation in conspiracy theories of people saying, don't trust the science, don't trust the vaccine.
Well, yeah, and that's some of those accusations were thrown at him as well. Mm-hmm. Necessarily, advancements in science, in the arts, and sports are going to be outside the box. Mm-hmm. And they're probably going to be from people who are difficult, who don't think in the way other people think, and can be accused easily of being conspiracy or theorists or paranoid or all these different things that were thrown around during the pandemic. I think it's dangerous for us to suppress new ideas. In medicine, new ideas will necessarily sometimes mean that the old ideas, in this case, going from doing an autopsy straight to helping a young woman give birth, was killing the young woman. The doctors weren't doing it intentionally. They thought they were helping the young woman, but they were carrying unknowingly bacteria on their hands. Now, that's one of the reasons that they didn't accept this new theory and attacked it in the same way new theories are attacked in our time. And I think it's dangerous.
Do you fear that there are specific things that come to mind when you talk about new ideas being closed down or new ideas being attacked? What's on your mind when you say that?
I'm thinking particularly, I'm not a doctor, I'm an artist, but I remember when I first came into the theatre in 1980, I feel like there were a lot more kind of oddballs and difficult people in the theatre. And now and I think on film sets too. And now I regularly, understandably, meet directors who only want people who are easy to work with. They don't want anyone difficult. They don't want anything like that. And I think that also can be a loss.
Would it be harder for the young Mark Rylance to make his way now, do you think?
Yes, I think so, yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Why do you say that?
I was temperamental and moody and difficult to understand. And I think today I've got a bad reputation and not got so much, not been welcomed into work.
And you have, of course, had enormous acclaim, you know, with almost every award going, and of course a knighthood too. I mean, with the portrait you paint there of a young Mark Rylance, recoil at the idea of becoming a Sir one day.
Would he recoil at
Yes.
becoming a Sir?
Yes.
It wasn't in my imagination of how things would proceed, no.
But would you have thought that was outrageous, or that was something that you would turn down if it were ever to be offered to you?
Yes, I did turn down an honour that was offered earlier than that. And I still sometimes am unsure about it. But I have such respect for our king, who himself has been a rebel and someone who has said things that people thought at the time were difficult.
I want to ask you something else about the business of acting, how you go about things. So the actor Michael Sheen has recently said it's hard for him to accept seeing people who aren't Welsh playing Welsh characters. What do you think of that?
I understand what he feels. I can see it's even more powerful for people who have a disability or some aspect of themselves that they feel is suppressed when they haven't been given work. When I was at RADA in 78 to 79, I'm not sure there was anyone from the African diaspora, maybe one actor in the 80s. When I was at the RSC in 1982, I don't think there was any actors from the African diaspora in that company at that time. So things have improved, and so now it's unthinkable that anyone other than someone from the African diaspora would play Othello, for example. And I think it's probably getting difficult to play Shylock if you're not Jewish. But I certainly doubt that I'll play a woman again.
Really?
I would suspect that's not, it's not where society is at the moment.
But is there a risk to that? Because surely, the most fundamental thing about acting is someone like yourself using their talent to pretend and convince all of us that you are someone that you are not. And we have also seen recently black actors playing real life white figures from history. So isn't there a risk actually? Because with all of this then, who decides what's okay?
I think there is a risk to the imagination. I think it is a shame that we're closing down the ability for people to imagine and experience. For me, it was very, very useful for me to play women, the times that I played women. Playing Cleopatra, I've never suffered so much in any of the male roles I've played as I suffered when I played Cleopatra, as indeed I think many women have suffered for many years, the deaths of warrior husbands in wars. And the way Shakespeare writes that, the way he writes women, the way whoever wrote Shakespeare writes women is incredible. There's no greater writing of women in the history of drama. So I think it's a shame both for artists not to play, and I pretended to be a Welshman at times and had a wonderful time doing that and learning that beautiful way of speaking that Welsh people have. So I think it is a little, I think it's a bit of a dull theatre if theatre's politically correct. It's a place for us to imagine things and experience things that, if we experience them in life, would maybe cause us harm. But I think suppressing the imagination is not the way we're going to move forward. We need the imagination more than ever now. And to play and imagine and pretend is a great way to get out of tight situations.
It's been such a pleasure to talk to you this morning.
Thank you.
It's fascinating. Thank you so much. The glorious Mark Rylance, and you can see his new play, Dr. Semmelweis, written with Stephen Brown at the Harold Pinter Theatre in London from the end of this month. Now it's nearly 10 o'clock. Cast your minds back to that video of staffers partying at Tory HQ. Here is what the Cabinet Minister, Michael Gove, had to say.
Naturally, anyone looking at this video is going to be extremely angry.
Should you say sorry to people this morning for this? This was happening in your party headquarters. We know it happened in Downing Street on your party's watch. Should you apologise?
Yes, I am sorry. I do apologise, unreservedly.
But what lots of you have been getting in touch about is how expensive things are getting. Natasha Keenan told us on email, I've been renting my property at £1,550 a month, but the rent's going up to £1,950. I cannot afford the rise. She says that she'll be homeless in August as a result of that. But on the other side, Sharon Cater has said people need to take responsibility and curb their spending habits and accept that inflation needs to fall. Not a very happy situation. Simon, I just wonder, partly listening to Mark Rylance, partly dipping into your new book about the history of pandemics and plagues, we've lived through such an extraordinary period, haven't we?
Yeah, no, we really have, and I'm really thrilled to hear that Mark is in a play about the great Semmelweis, and it just leads us to reflect, really, at a moment when we have so many existential crises coming at us: climate change, the next pandemic around the corner, the sense, really, in which those who determine the way we live economically are completely outside our control. That human beings are this funny paradox, Laura. On the one hand, we're remarkable. We produce Semmelweises, and Waldemar Hafkin, who's at the heart of my story, who develops the first vaccines against cholera and bubonic plague. So we're paragons of the Enlightenment. We can do scientific miracles. We can produce a vaccine against COVID far quicker than anyone would imagine. On the other hand, we're this barely evolved, mad cartload of primitive paranoia, hysteria, conspiracy theories, and idiotically trivial complacency seen jiving while the rest of us poor mortals were locked down. And no wonder, you know, those machine minds inside AI will one day, you know, the first AI person will come on your show and say, really, you had your go, Homo sapiens. You blew it. Now it's our turn.
Probably not that long before they're in this seat. Samuel, I know you were involved in working on the vaccine when you were in Number 10. What do you think about that now when you reflect on all of this?
About the vaccines or about not the parties?
Well, I suppose the sort of terrible mishmash in a way of what Simon is saying.
Human beings are completely complex. We can achieve brilliant things and do really stupid things, and it could all manifest itself simultaneously. And so Boris Johnson's legacy is, of course, the vaccine deployment, but it's also some of the nonsense that happened when I was there. But it's completely possible to achieve great things and still be a bit of a knob, I think. Not that I'm calling Boris Johnson a knob, of course.
Goodness me, and it's a family show on a Sunday morning, so I hope nobody's offended by that language. But Justine, you know, as somebody who, you know, gave so much of your life to the Conservative Party as a minister, when you look at what's happening now in this endless melodrama and this extraordinary period that we've lived through, how damaged do you think the party is?
I think it is damaged because it went in lock, stock and barrel with Boris Johnson. He delivered a landslide victory, but in the end didn't seem to have a plan for either Brexit or delivering levelling up. Now we have a Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who has plans, but actually we're missing the vision. So the party will look back on this term and feel it could have achieved so much more for the British people, but there's still time to do that.
OK, all three of you, thank you so very much indeed for joining us this morning. Simon, Samuel and Justine, thank you very much indeed. And the pandemic, of course, one of the forces that has changed all of our lives and our politics. Interest rate rise expected on Thursday is going to keep changing things too, piling more pressure on mortgage holders and borrowers to pay the bills and presenting a dilemma for the government. Ministers stepped in with billions to help pay our energy bills, but maybe that's created an expensive precedent that it might be impossible for them to escape. I just wonder. Although listening to Michael Gove this morning, the government's nowhere near ready to talk about stepping in a big way. And with that video and a possible vote on the report that condemned Boris Johnson tomorrow, it is also hard for the Conservatives to shake off the nightmares of Partygate still. You can head to the iPlayer for anything you missed as ever, and there'll be tons on the BBC News live page to chew over. But thank you so much for your company. Happy Father's Day, and I'll look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week. But for now, goodbye.
I don't know at the same time next week. Probably the same day though. I don't know at the same time. I'm up early this morning. Only thing useful in that entire show was that fella saying the word knob live on air just before 10 o'clock in the morning. The rest is complete bollocks. Fuck the Tories. Oh, and fuck the SNP as well. Just to add to that. See you all tomorrow for this batshit crazy report. Hope you all have a nice Father's Day or whatever. And yeah, enjoy your day. And I'll see you all tomorrow. Ta-ra.